Let's now take a look at what kind of impact World War I had on the world. After the American Army entered the war, the Allied forces were able to push back some of the Central Powers. This Allied advance, combined with the refusal of many of Germany's military to just not fight anymore, called a mutiny. This helped the Central Powers decide that it was time to end the war. The leaders of the European countries decided to end the fighting on November 11th, 1918, at 11 a.m. After more than 16 million deaths, half from civilians, the Central Powers agreed to an armistice, or ceasefire. The war was over, but its impact would continue on for the rest of the century. Let's take a closer look at 3 ways that World War I impacted the world. We'll start with the Treaty of Versailles. After the armistice of November 1918, a final official end to the war needed to be worked out on paper. The leaders of the country met at the Palace of Versailles in France to do this. The Central Powers were clearly the losers in the war, but the question was how much to punish them. France, whose country had been most destroyed of what were called the Big Three, US, Britain, and France. France was in favor of treating Germany and the other Central Powers as harshly as possible. In their view, Germany and the other Central Powers should pay. Britain also felt that Germany should be punished. But the United States had not experienced the devastation of these other 2 countries, and it thought that Germany had learned its lesson, and now should be allowed to start the rebuilding process. In the end, France and Britain got what they wanted. Germany was forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles. The treaty made Germany say that they were responsible for the war, made them give up some of their land, reduce their military, and pay back an enormous amount of money to help France and Belgium rebuild. Although France and Britain felt good about this resolution, it would have disastrous consequences less than 20 years later. Germany, unable to pay what it was supposed to, found itself increasingly hopeless. That would begin to change when a new charismatic leader rose to power in Germany, vowing to help Germany rise again and promising to cancel the agreements made in the Treaty of Versailles. The charismatic leader would be Adolf Hitler, who would eventually begin World War II. It's possible that if the Treaty of Versailles had been easier on Germany, that World War II would have never happened. Now let's look at the long-term impact that the war had on the U.S. Out of all the major nations that participated in the war, the U.S. had some of the most positive outcomes. Through its role in the war, the United States was able to better cement its reputation as an economic and world leader. The United States benefited economically from the war. During the war, the U.S. economy had grown from the sale of goods to the Allies in Europe. After the war ended, businesses still benefited by selling materials needed by European countries to rebuild. Before the war, if a country needed to borrow money, it often went to European countries. But after the war, as Europe lay in ruins, the United States became the place that other countries would go to borrow money. The war also helped civil rights causes in the United States. Women, who previously were only allowed to work in limited jobs, found that during the war they were suddenly in demand. As men went off to war, women filled in, working in jobs that were previously thought to be only suitable for men. Similarly, African American workers found increasing job opportunities that had previously only been available to white men. Although President Woodrow Wilson was not able to convince the United States to join the League of Nations, his vision would continue on. Decades later, after World War II, the United States would have a major role in forming what was basically the League of Nations version 2.0. Today we call it the United Nations. Today the United Nations continues the work toward the goal of promoting peace among the countries of the world. Some of the success of the United Nations has come by lessons we learned from the League of Nations. Finally, let's look at an unexpected impact of the war. Toward the end of the war, a strange disease began to spread among the soldiers. It was called by many names, including La Gripe, the Spanish Lady, and sandfly fever. Spain was the first country to publicly publish reports about this new flu. Because of this, others called it the Spanish flu. This flu was abnormal because it was more deadly to people between 20 and 35 years old than the young and the elderly. And usually with flu, it's the other way around. This flu often struck quickly, sometimes killing its victims within hours or days. People with the flu became very sick, sometimes coughing up frothy blood from their lungs. This flu that began to circulate in 1918 eventually affected the entire world. As the war ended, many soldiers left Europe to return to their homes, and they carried the flu with them. Many cities and towns created restrictions to try to minimize the spread of the disease, but these efforts were often not enough. By the time this particular flu died out in 1919, an unknown amount of people around the world had died. Estimates of death range from 20 million to 100 million. Compare this number to the 16 million deaths in all of World War I. Today, organizations like the World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention monitor diseases around the world. They try to learn as much as they can about diseases so that they can prevent another disease like the flu of 1918 from happening in the world today. So as you can see, World War I impacted the world far beyond its own time. Nations learned how important it is to help a nation who loses a war to rebuild and move on. The United States found that the war helped it become an even stronger world power. And the Spanish flu helped the world realize the need for organizations like the World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to identify and try to stop outbreaks of diseases before they spread around the world.